Expensive gear is not nearly as important as people think. Here's what I mean by that. In the home theater enthusiast crowd, we really get into the nitty gritty of like exactly how something performs, like how much extra performance and sound quality we can get out of each piece of gear. And we talk about marginal benefit. So it's like, yes, this thing is going to provide this much benefit, but it costs this much more cost, right? So is it worth it, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to say some things today that might ruffle some feathers. And I'm going to start by saying that you can buy the most expensive processor. You can buy the most expensive amps. You can buy the most expensive speakers. Go right on down the line. And it is not going to matter if you have not built a solid foundation, if you haven't got the fundamentals right. I think a lot of people like to believe that if they spend X number of dollars on a piece of gear, it is just going to magically provide them with this amazing audio experience. The gear matters less than building a solid foundation. Now, what do I mean by building a solid foundation? There are four things that I've identified, and I'm sure there are others, but I put these four things on the list at the top of the list of if you don't have these things right, then it doesn't really matter how expensive your gear is. It's not going to sound right and it's not going to look right. You are not going to get the immersive experience that you're looking for. Calibration. I see this all the time on forums where people will say things like, oh, that particular AVR, that's garbage. I bought that, I plugged it in, it sounded horrible, it killed my bass, blah, blah. I messed with it, I couldn't get it to sound right. And they gave it up and they sent it back, they returned it. They're like, it's garbage. I've used a lot of different processors, a lot of different AVRs, all the way from a budget Onkyo AVR that's 8 years old, all the way up to a Trinnov, and a lot of gear in between. And I can tell you, it's pretty rare for a piece of gear to just straight up be junk. It's pretty rare for something out of the box to just be beyond hope. It's just not going to work. With calibration, however, you can take almost any piece of gear, any AVR, speakers, amplifiers, etc., and you can dial it in to the point where it is going to sound good. On the flip side, you can buy a very expensive piece of gear, and if you don't calibrate it right, it will sound like garbage. Now, with calibration, this requires effort on your part. Either you have to learn about how to calibrate, learn the principles and the mechanics of the particular audio correction software that comes with your particular AVR, actually do the work of figuring out how to make it work and how to fine tune it. You're either going to have to do that yourself or you're going to have to hire a professional calibrator, somebody who knows what they're doing. There's just no way around it. It just has to, that is something that has to be done. Now, I know that there are marketing pitches out there that pitch a particular audio correction software as like the end all be all, and it's like, just run this, run through the steps, boom, it's going to sound magical. In my experience, every sound correction program requires tweaking after you run it. Straight out of the box, if you just do it as is and you don't mess with it, you don't fine tune it, it's not going to sound great. It can sound good. It'll certainly sound better than no calibration at all, but that fine tuning, that extra tweaking on top of running the auto calibration, that's where you get that extra level of performance. And that requires you to educate yourself. And in my experience, it's education and just trial and error. I can't tell you how many times I have calibrated this theater and how many times I've calibrated my tiny theater with lots of different equipment. It's just over and over and over again and trying different things and then testing the results. And it just comes with practice. So it just requires work, persistence, and practice. So what is the second element to a solid foundation? That is room treatment. You have got to treat your room. An untreated room, I have not encountered an untreated room that sounds decent. That's just been my experience. An untreated room, I walk into it and then I listen to the demos. I hear how it performs. In an untreated room, always I'm like, there's a lot of room for improvement here. So you have got to learn about absorption and diffusion and learning about how to treat the reflection points in your room, the walls, especially the ceiling. Don't forget about your ceiling. In this particular theater, I noticed a dramatic improvement in the sound quality when I treated my ceiling. I put 4-inch thick absorption panels on my ceiling, and that made a massive difference. And I brought people into my theater before I put on the sound panels on the walls, did some demos. They were all very impressed. They're like, wow, this sounds amazing. And then after I added the sound treatment, I brought those same people back. These are not audiophiles. These are not home theater enthusiasts. These are just my friends. And they noticed a difference. I was like, this is what I've done. And, I showed them the panels. They could see them. And I'm like, do you hear a difference? And they said yes. They were like, yeah, absolutely, I hear a difference. And I don't think they were just telling me what I wanted to hear, because the difference was unmistakable. It really, really was. Don't forget to treat your room. That is critical. It kills me when I see these guys with these, tens of thousands of dollars in gear in an untreated room. It's like, oh my gosh, that's painful. Like, you've got to treat your room. You could have spent so much less money and gotten a superior sounding room if you had just treated the room and done like average to below average gear. You could outperform that high-end stuff if you just treated your room correctly. So what's the third thing? The third thing is speaker placement. This is a critical element, and it doesn't cost any money. It doesn't cost any money to put your speakers where they need to go. Now, I have done on this channel, I've created a couple videos about speaker placement. I go through the calculations of how to calculate where to place your speaker. I give you a very straightforward formula. It makes it super easy to place them in the ideal location. Now, I understand that there are limitations. You might have a door right where a speaker needs to go, right? Like, there might be a light in your ceiling right where a speaker needs to go, right? So I get that there are limitations, that you're not always able to put a speaker exactly where it needs to go. However, if you run the calculations and you determine the ideal speaker placement and then set the speaker as close as possible to that location, you will get amazing results. It doesn't matter how expensive your gear is, how many thousands of dollars you spend on speaker wire. If you don't place your speakers correctly, it's not going to sound great. Now, there are exceptions. I wouldn't say exception, but there's a caveat, slight caveat to that. In the case of Trinnov, which I've got a Trinnov here in this theater right now. It's on loan from Trinnov. I've still got it for another month or so, and I'm loving it. It is awesome. Trinnov has a 3D speaker placement, 3D mapping technology, where it is able to determine where the speakers are actually placed and then compensate for those speaker placements by creating sounds in a different place where it should actually be coming from. And it's able to do that through imaging through multiple speakers to create the illusion. It tricks your ear into thinking that the sound is coming from a specific location, even when the speaker isn't actually there. And it does that so that it can compensate for poor speaker placement. But that's a feature that you get with a $20,000 Trinnov. Anything below that is not going to be able to really compensate if you don't have good speaker placement to begin with. The fourth element to building a solid foundation in your home theater is to do everything you can to build an immersive experience. And this doesn't cost any extra money. Well, it costs a little bit extra, but it's a negligible amount. What do I mean by an immersive experience? One, you have got to dark out your room. You've got to get it as dark as possible so that when you're watching a movie, everything disappears, the glares disappear, the light reflections disappear, and you are able to focus on just the screen. Along with that, get as big of a screen as possible. Now, yes, it does cost more the bigger you go. But again, this is in the grand scheme of your whole setup, going from 100-inch to 145-inch, the difference in cost is not a ton. And so by building your setup with the largest screen possible, I've never heard somebody say, I really like that theater, but man, the screen was just a little bit too big. I have never heard that. Get your screen as big as you can and get it so that you are completely immersed. Large screen, dark room, that will get you a long ways towards an immersive experience. And along with that is where you place your main listening position. Don't get too close to the screen. Don't get too far back away from the screen. Get the Goldilocks zone right there in the middle. And on that note, don't put your seat all the way against the back wall. Up in my tiny theater, it's a room that is 11 feet by 11 feet. And even in that room, I have pulled the chairs back away from the back wall a good 4 feet. And so the reason for that is sound, especially the bass, the lower frequencies, tend to kind of get caught up in like, it almost sounds kind of like a whirlpool. It's like this like vortex of bass on your back wall, and it's muddy and it's unpleasant, and you don't want to be sitting in that. So set your seat away from the back wall. That doesn't cost any extra money. You just pull your seat away from the back wall so that you can avoid those lower bass notes that will really muddy up the sound. If you do those 4 things and you set a solid foundation, you can take pretty much any gear out there and make it sound great. You don't really have to really stress and strain over, this AVR over that AVR. I mean, once you've used enough different AVRs and enough different speakers, you start to see that really the common denominator is how well you implement the gear. The gear itself is not a magic bullet. Spending $10,000 on a processor is not going to magically make your home theater amazing. Same thing with a sub. Putting in a 24-inch sub is not going to suddenly make your bass just incredible, because a poorly implemented 24-inch subwoofer is going to sound pretty bad if you do it wrong. On the flip side, a 12-inch or a 15-inch subwoofer that's really dialed in, you've got the placement really nailed down, you've got the calibration just perfect, that is going to be a good sounding sub. So the bottom line is learn the principles, learn what you're doing, figure out how to make the most of the gear that you have, and lay a solid foundation and reap the benefits. Thanks for watching.